Hello, my name is Hemal Grasinger. I'd like to welcome all of you to another edition of the Vishvavahini Community Connect program. We have with us today a visiting academic from the University of Colombo, Emeritus Professor Siri Hettige. Welcome to our program, Vishvavahini program, Professor Hettige.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. Professor Hettige, who is now retired, was the head of the Sociology Department and also Dean of the Faculty of Arts at the University of Colombo for many years. He has published many books and has written articles on Sri Lankan society and people, especially in areas of development, health, education, youth affairs, etc., and has played a pivotal role in policy development. Today in this program, we would like to discuss causes and effects of poverty and vulnerability faced by many people in Sri Lanka, and what can be done to address these issues. So firstly, Professor Hettige, I'd like to ask you whether you could define what poverty and vulnerability means in the Sri Lankan context, to set the scene and also back it up with some statistical evidence, if you can.
Yes, I mean, poverty is a fairly narrow, concept, as you can imagine, because here we are talking about people being falling below a certain level of income. Mm-hmm. But whereas vulnerability is much broader, and there we are looking at a range of dimensions. In other words, sources of vulnerability can be very diverse, and it's not necessarily related to employment and income, and they emanate from other areas like education, health, and also living conditions like housing and so on, and then also of course the environmental factors like, for instance, the disasters. So when you are exposed to a range of various sources of vulnerability, you are in a much worse situation than when you are just affected by, let's say, employment-related issues like low income, instability of income, and so on and so forth. Because you see, you can target people who are vulnerable, people who are poor, through various intervention programs related to income. Mm-hmm. But whereas when you have range of vulnerabilities, you have to have programs that would address all those. Yes. In other words, the state interventions have to be much broader and diverse to address vulnerabilities than poverty.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what is the main cause of all of this? Is it historical? Is it economic? Political?
Now, of course, there is no one factor, as you can imagine. Poverty is very much a structural issue. It is generated by the economy, how the economy is structured, organized, and how people relate to that economy, and so on. So, obviously, you have to look at the structural underpinnings of poverty. But when it comes to vulnerability, there are many more factors. Like, for instance, today we are talking a great deal about climate change. Yeah. And the climate change can impact people wherever they are, whatever they do. But then climate change related disasters can impact much in a much bigger way when you look at some of these vulnerable groups in society.
And statistically, I read somewhere that about 27% of the population or so can be defined as being poor or at the poverty level. Is that something that is island-wide, and is there pockets of poverty, or is it everywhere?
No, actually, this is based on the multidimensional poverty study or index, if you like, that was done in 2019. Now, of course, this was very much related to the economic and social circumstances. And at that time, I think when they looked at multidimensional vulnerability, it was about 27%. But as you know, when you look at poverty, as a reflection of how people, manage with earning an income and the level of income, I think that there we have a problem because it is very much restricted in terms of definition. So traditionally what we have done is to basically come up with income support schemes, like we have had several of those, but on the other hand, you have to address the causes. Dealing with the symptom is not enough. I mean, in health we say prevention is better than cure. Whereas in the case of poverty, we tend to deal with the symptoms. I mean, the manifestation, but we need to also address the root causes. So that's where structure of the economy comes in a big way. See, in Sri Lanka, economy has been quite distorted in the recent decades. And as a result, more and more people have become marginalized in terms of regular employment and various other factors that are connected with employment.
So you mentioned effects that climate change as well. So, I mean, is that people complain about the weather? It's too hot, and there's rain, and all the seasons have changed, and I don't know what's the situation there. The impact of that is felt right across as well, I guess. Farmers and people going to work and schools and
I mean, we have been basically looking at disasters as a problem that has to be managed. But on the other hand, disaster management is one thing, but reducing disaster risk is another. So the point is, when there's a disaster, naturally people who are, let's say, in that particular area, like for instance, there's a drought, people in a drought-stricken area would be affected by the drought, and they will not have their crops, and they will not have the income that they expected from their crops, and so on and so forth. But then when you look at other disasters like landslides, floods, and so on and so forth, and also coastal hazards, the people who are living in those areas are very much affected. But on the other hand, today we are not talking about disaster management, we are talking about disaster risk reduction. In other words, people who are exposed to some of these disasters can be protected by changing the circumstances. Like for instance, sometimes you have to resettle people. I mean, that's what after the tsunami, what we did was, in Sri Lanka, after 2004, many people were resettled away from the coast, and settlements were built quite far from the coast, so that they had to be, of course, supported in terms of finding new livelihoods and so on and so forth, or provide the necessary support for them to engage in the same activities, but from a distance. Like for instance, they had to live in one place and travel to and so on and so forth. But then and then of course in flood prone areas like low-lying areas, the people who are living there are exposed to this risk on a regular basis. Like when there is sometimes it is seasonal. Like every year you have to be ready for this particular issue. So the point is, again, the risk reduction involves something more than just providing relief. But you need to really figure out how to resettle some of these people away from the flood-prone areas, and those things, of course, involve investment in new areas. Have to be opened up, and then they have to be provided with infrastructure, livelihoods, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the same is true for landslides.
Yeah.
And many people are living on some of these, areas.
Hilly areas,
And they are. So the point is that that unless you resettle them away from those vulnerable spots, you will not be able to really protect them from those disasters. So the point is that we need to really think in terms of reducing vulnerabilities, reducing flood, disaster risk. But of course, that is not what we normally do. I mean, under when we had the the tsunami, that was a major event, and everybody paid attention, and then we really looked around to find various ways of reducing the risk of
happening
you can't
again.
reduce the risk of
Yeah.
tsunami, but on the other hand, if a tsunami comes, you will have much less impact on people because they will be living away from some of these areas. But of course, you cannot have 100% solution, because some of the people will have to live closer to the coast and then engage in various activities, and also of course there are settlements right along the coast. So there's no way that you could resettle all those people, but certainly the most vulnerable have to be resettled.
I think another point about poverty is that health factors. There's so many people affected by all these issues, and it affects their health. And I don't think there is sufficient health management at that level for poorer people in terms of going to a doctor, hospitals, or even getting medicine that they want. So their living life becomes worse.
Well, I think, if you are thinking in terms of factors contributing to poverty, there are so many. For instance, when you look at health, certainly what you say is true. But on the other hand, it also depends on the health system itself.
Yes.
And if the health system is, not fully developed, particularly to reach out to these people who are living in some of these disadvantaged areas like rural areas, plantation areas, and then also disadvantaged urban areas and so on and so forth, then it is the health system that has to be looked at. Because if you really provide easy access to good health care, then they will not be affected by the diseases in the same way as when you see they are really do not have the access to healthcare. Now, of course, it depends on how equitable the health system is. I think it's the same with education. Now, if the education system is equitable, and if it is developed everywhere, at least to provide basic minimum facilities and resources, then you probably have a much better situation. So what has happened over the years in Sri Lanka is that these systems have undergone a lot of change, like education, health, and also of course transport. So you have a highly unequitable or highly unequal system of education and a highly unequal system of health, and same with transport. So these are three things that almost everyone needs.
That's right.
Health, education, and transport. So that is one thing that we'll have to look at, and we have to look at it from a systemic angle, and how to really make these systems equitable, so that everyone has equal access. But that is not really the case today, because you have very, very unequal conditions in all three sectors, education and transport. So now when you go to rural areas, what happens is that rural schools do not have the minimum, facilities, teachers and equipment, and, other facilities that are required. So the people have been basically taking their children away from these schools and marginalizing them. But then there are certain families, they have no choice. They have to, because they don't have the resources to have access to better schools in urban areas and so on. I think that's the same with education as well.
I think so. The free education system, I guess, is more or less collapsed now. And though people talk of going for tuition classes even from younger ages. So in terms of talking about the poorer people, we said 20% onwards. That's millions of people who are poor. How can they afford to, send their kids to tuition classes? And how is anybody looking at that? Or it's just that it's just left like that.
Yeah, there was a time when people everywhere in the country looked at education as a way of moving away from poverty and deprivation.
Yes.
If you really, get your educational qualifications, and if you get the necessary professional, qualifications and even, other skills, you might be able to really move into better employment.
Yes.
And that really allowed people to, improve their social and economic conditions. But whereas when you have more and more people being marginalized in the education system, they tend to sort of drop out.
Yes.
And then they tend to, join the informal sector. And the informal sector, of course, as you can imagine, do not provide the same opportunities. In terms of, let's say, improved, living conditions and better future prospects and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, in Sri Lanka, the informal sector expanded much faster than the formal sector. I think, something like 60% of the people who are employed, either self-employed or employed by institutions, they are basically operating within the informal sector. In other words, you have all the problems that you can think of, like for instance, not having, let's say, regular work. And then, social protection, like for instance, being, enrolled in a pension scheme or, like even employers' provident fund, for instance. You can only be part of that system if you have regular employment in a formal institution. So if you are a kind of informal sector worker, you have a problem, in the short run, because you may not necessarily have regular employment, and your income might be rather sporadic, and incomes might also be low, and so on. But on the other hand, if you really move into the formal sector, you will have regular employment, and then also you will become part of like a retirement scheme, like EPF and ETF and so on and so forth, and then also formal pension schemes like in the public sector.
So for families who are struggling, so that's a key thing, to have a regular income, and especially if you take education. We do help some people there, and when we talk to them, they say their main concern is to, even if they want to sacrifice on not having 3 meals a day, they'd rather have sufficient money to pay for tuition. So that O-level, A-level kind of barriers are still there very strongly, and they struggle to send their children to school at that age and buy the school equipment and books and even computers or whatever they need these days. Was a big thing, and I remember even during COVID time, they used to complain that people didn't have those electronic ways to learn, and they had to get basic mobile phones, I believe, and try to learn that way. So it would have impacted them a lot.
Well, this dependence on tuition has been there for quite some time now. More and more people rely on tuition because they think that the only way to get through their examinations, like even scholarship examination at grade 5, parents organize tuition for their children. So it starts with primary school, and then you certainly have to provide additional tuition at GC O level, and then certainly when you go to GC advanced level, which is very competitive because that's the university entrance examination. Wherever you are, you have to somehow provide this because people feel that the only way to get good marks and pass the examination with the necessary, D's and A's and whatever, depending on the examination, you think that you have to somehow send them to a good private tuition class. And the private tuition class, of course, have mushroomed. We hardly saw private tuition classes when we were in school, like in the 60s. But whereas now it is everywhere, in rural areas. So now this has become a very significant problem that has really not been addressed. And one way of addressing that would be to reduce the significance of these examinations. The point is, like, we put so much emphasis on these examinations, and as a result, everything hinges on how you manage with your competitive exams. You see, so people don't see any alternative, and they naturally get more and more problems as a result, because you have to decide whether to spend this money on something more productive or whether to spend this money on private tuition. So people naturally want to give their children a chance because they think that if their children do well, they will have a better prospects in the future. In other words, in old age, if your children are fairly well settled in terms of employment and various other factors, you will be better off. So it is many people think this as an investment in their own future, not only in the future of the children.
That's right.
And then many people nowadays think that, we have to somehow give our children an education so that they might be able to get out of the country. So it has come to that, actually.
Poorer you are, the more vulnerable you are in that sense.
Absolutely. And I think here we probably have to look at, as I already mentioned, the systemic issues, like, for instance, the economic system in the country. Our structure of our economy is so distorted today that there's no balance between different kind of sectors. Like, for instance, we were heading towards having a balanced economy in the past. Like, agriculture was given the emphasis for obvious reasons, but then they realized that without industries, you won't be able to really move forward, and therefore, Sri Lanka went for industrialization, and in fact, we established so many industries, in the 60s and the 70s, and then of course the services have to be improved, both the social services as well as other services like telecommunication, transport, and so on and so forth. But then the point is that when you don't have, let's say, much to export, you don't get the exchange that is needed to import various things. So as a result, you have a growing trade deficit. And we have had this growing trade deficit for a long time. In other words, you always need more money, from your, let's say, from your exports to support your increasing imports. But then there was no way that you could do that, because therefore we had a growing trade deficit. So then we certainly had to find other ways to bring in foreign exchange, and that is when we started sending people overseas, like the migrant workers.
Yeah.
And we exploited the Middle East labor market to the fullest possible extent. And for instance, there was a time when we had something like 2 million people out of 8.5 million workforce employed in the Middle East. And of course, now we have people going in all directions. Like, for instance, East Asia has also attracted a lot of our labor.
Yeah.
But then what happens is that you have a less and less people to work
at home.
And that basically pushed that tend to push the wages up. And when you have wages going up, a lot of the economic activities become unprofitable. Even farmers, in the rural areas find it difficult because the labor is too expensive. And similarly, when you don't have, let's say, enough skilled labor, you can't really embark on industrial, kind of projects, And then, as you know, our garment industry, which was really thriving, say, about 30 years ago, now it has contracted substantially, and as a result, it is not the same kind of source of foreign exchange for us as it used to be.
And other countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam and all that have capitalized on that too.
That's right.
So we get ourselves into a bit of a...
So now this structural imbalance of the economy is a major policy issue. Unless and until you address that issue, you will not be able to restore the economy in a way that would really be...
So what are the key policy areas that you think needs attention now to fix, say, poverty issues and vulnerability of people?
No, I want to move away from this poverty thing because recently, we have been, working on something much broader than poverty, and that is vulnerability.
Vulnerability,
So, with the, the initiative of the UNDP, a new front was opened up, and that is called the multidimensional vulnerability. In other words, here we are looking at a range of vulnerabilities that the people are exposed to. So it is not just income poverty.
What are the key ones there?
Now, of course, there are many factors, but they are basically divided in this particular index. They are divided into 3 areas. One is education, and second is health and disasters, and then you have living standards. And under each one of these, you have number of factors that are considered, constituting that particular dimension. So that's why it is called multi-dimensional vulnerability. And then you have to basically look at all these dimensions, the 3 dimensions, and the factors that come under these 3 dimensions. So you basically broaden the scope of policy making. It's not just one sector. It has to be multi-sectoral. Say, for instance, now take, for instance, the disasters. And the people are exposed to disaster risks more and more now. And therefore, you have to really figure out how to reduce the exposure of people to disasters, because the adaptability to these disasters varies from family to family, depending on their circumstances. Like, for instance, if you are fairly well off, and if you are living in a better area, and if you are having basic housing, housing conditions and so on and so forth, and so on, you are much less vulnerable. But whereas if you are living in a kind of very exposed kind of part of the country, like, say, for instance, some areas are flood prone, and obviously people living in those areas are going to be far more affected. But then not all of those people who are living in that area. So, certain people get, exposed to these things more, and so on and so forth. And then, if you and your capacity to really respond to, such situations varies depending on your own situation. Like, for instance, if you are really, living in a, like a low-lying area, and if you don't have a regular income, if you are dependent entirely on one source of income like agriculture, and you will be reduced to zero.
That's right.
That's right.
While you're talking about that, I was thinking of a profile of a vulnerable person, and a most vulnerable person is somebody who doesn't have a regular income, lives in an area that is not really good for them and the education of their children, and sometimes a single family, sometimes the worker is gone overseas, and the disruption that it does to a person's life like that. So that is a typical vulnerable person. So the health could be bad and all of those factors. So there are quite a few like that.
Yeah, the vulnerability profile of a family depends on a range of factors, as I already mentioned.
Yes.
So you can actually not only look at the household level. I mean, say for instance, let's say in a village you have so many households. Not all those households are going to be exposed to the same extent.
Yes.
Some might be protected by certain factors, and some might be, not be protected by the same factors. And so, say for instance, if you are in regular employment, whatever that happens, you will have your regular income. I mean, if you are salaried if you have a salaried employment, obviously you are going to get your salary, and so on. So, and then if you have family members are all very healthy, there are no chronically ill people, and there are not disabled people, elderly people, and so on and so forth. You are much less vulnerable. And so at a household level, you can actually identify how vulnerable this household is, and therefore it is easier to target various interventions to those households which are more vulnerable. And you don't have to worry too much about the families that are not vulnerable.
Yes.
And then you can aggregate it to other levels, higher levels. Like for instance, if you take, let's say a district, you can actually aggregate, and then you can figure out, what is the level of vulnerability of this particular district. And it is a composite.
So do policymakers do it that way, district level?
No, I mean, not yet. Actually, now under this particular scheme, it is possible, because you not only have vulnerability index for the whole country. In other words, what is the proportion of the households that are vulnerable? Right? What is the proportion? Now that is actually according to this, the recently developed index. It's about 56% of the households are vulnerable to varying degrees. Because it is not just poverty. It's a whole range of factors that go into this particular kind of index. So at a national level, we have a major issue, right? And this is really the cumulative effect of all what has happened over the last several decades, in education, health, transport, and then also employment, and so on. So you have a whole range of factors coming together to produce this very high level of vulnerability in the country. Then you go down to the district level, then you can see how the districts differ. How districts differ, in terms of the level of vulnerability. Some districts are, more vulnerable than the others, and then you can see why some districts are more vulnerable. So, and it is possible to identify those vulnerable districts, and then you can ask, okay, what do we do to reduce this high level of vulnerability if this particular district? What are the kind of things that we have to do? Investments and various, other interventions, and then improvement of services, and so on and so forth. So the point is that we need to really look at it from a broader perspective, so that what you do is also can be fashioned accordingly. Like for instance, I think an equitable education system is better. That will reduce vulnerability of so many
true.
people.
Yes.
And similarly, a better and equitable health system will reduce a lot of vulnerability.
Right. Yes.
And then having a good system of vulnerability reduction in terms of disasters, that would also reduce a lot of the vulnerabilities, and so on. And then education, as what I mean, if you have a fairly good education system across the country, with little variation across regions and localities and so on and so forth. So the point is that to address a lot of these issues of poverty and vulnerability, you have to have a much broader perspective, and the policies have to be fashioned accordingly, and more so the interventions. The interventions have to be also fashioned accordingly, and there we are not only talking about at the national level. You have to have interventions shaped by local circumstances. Like in some districts you emphasize certain things than in the others, and so on. And I think that that is the kind of message that is coming out of this kind of analysis, and I think here we have very significant policy implications. Right? I mean, for instance, we have to think about reshaping our education system in order to reduce vulnerability, that inequality in education.
It's not only about passing the exam; it's about finding employment after that. The education should lead to that.
Absolutely, and also from an economic development perspective, you have no choice. You have to look at the structure of the economy, whether we like it or not. And if you just leave it as it is, and if you let things happen, rather than make things happen, you will not be able to reduce many of these vulnerabilities. I mean, you can't have such a huge informal sector in a country. I mean, more regular employment you have, better it is, because people are secure, and they can face various challenges better, and so on and so forth, and they also have better prospects, and they would naturally be in a better position to provide for their children, for instance. Now now they are trying their best, and I mean they are very pragmatic, but at the same time they have to really make choices. I mean, they have to cut corners to accommodate some of these needs. Like, for instance, if like as you mentioned, during the COVID period, you had no choice. You had to go online, and then of course a mobile telephone is the minimum that you require, and then of course the internet connection, and so on and so forth. So, but the point is now when many people got marginalized because they just didn't have the. I mean, one thing in Sri Lanka, we have an added problem, unlike in some of the East Asian countries, where we have a fairly big problem with digital literacy. In other words, digital divide is very wide in Sri Lanka. We have only about a third of the population having access to online kind
internet,
of internet, and so on and so forth. So obviously digital literacy is number one, because that's the minimum thing today, and then of course having the necessary equipment and the resources to really make use of that facility, and that was very well demonstrated during the COVID period. But now, of course, today, with or without COVID, you have no choice. You have to really use this as a resource.
Yes.
So, and otherwise your children are going to be left behind.
That's right.
And so.
That's right. Yeah. So you covered a lot of ground in there. So you mentioned about how to address it, and you got to monitor what's going on regularly. And
I want to come to that in a minute, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
You see, now we cannot really all this from Colombo at a national level. Certainly national level is very critical. That is where policies are made, that is where programs are developed, and that is where resources are mobilized, and that is where the resources are allocated. So therefore national is very critical. But when it comes to really doing all what we discussed now, you have to go down the line. And I think we have to have a decentralized system of monitoring. And there, I think community-based monitoring system is critical.
Yes.
And community-based monitoring system would allow you to really do a lot of the things that are necessary to collect the data from households, and then analyze that data and store that data, share that data, and make use of that data for decision making, and then to also target various interventions and so on. That monitoring system can be used. And that is very easy today with the modern technology, and you only have to have a few trained people at the village level, and that you can easily find. And then of course some equipment, a computer and internet connection, and so on and so forth, and the necessary apps and so on. And you are set at a village level, like a government level. You can do it. And then what you do is just keep aggregating it at different levels. Like for instance, you aggregate it at the DS level, Divisional Secretariat level, and you have a Divisional Secretariat level database. You have a
so that's not happening now.
No, I mean, point is, not this kind of thing. Things are happening. There are many things happening, but what we are now talking about something very specific. Right? Like now what we do is we collect data and we send it up. Where do we send? We send it to Colombo. Census Department, Planning Ministry, and so on and so forth. They naturally put these things together and so on and so forth. But then you leave the people behind. But whereas you have to stay with your data where the people are. And that is when you can actually identify people who should be really reached out to with whatever interventions that you have. And then you see, like, you can keep an eye on these households, whether there are issues, whether they are doing well, whether they need anything more, and so on and so forth. And this is possible. We have a highly decentralized system of administration in Sri Lanka, as you know, from the center right down to the GN level. And we have one of the largest government employment. We have a large labor force employed in the public sector. And you have so many officers operating at a local level, and all that can be trained, can be deployed, and can be made use of to have a system at a local level, so that you would be able to really micromanage some of the issues at the lower level. But then, as you can imagine, we need to really put all that together at a national level, and then you basically bridge the gap between the national and the local. And right now we have this huge gap. What is happening at the national level and what is happening at the local level? I mean, I don't see any connection now. But now this can be easily established with the modern communication technology. It's not a big deal. You see, you can share data. You can make use of data, update your data, and you can do this very rapidly. Like, for instance, as you know, the census is done once in 10 years. I mean, imagine that kind of a database, for planning and intervention purposes. But whereas this data can be collected at a much, let's say more frequently, if you like. I mean, if you want to collect data, on a quarterly basis, you can do it. And they is done, at a local level by local people, and they don't have to run around the country. They do it, then and there, and they just upload it, and then it is accessible by people who are at the next level, and so on and so forth. So I think this kind of approach will help us to manage the problems better, and then to see whether we are making any progress, and if not, also to find out why. Now that all that can be done, then and there. So it's basically, having a national level program, but operating at different levels depending on the requirement.
Even linking to what you're saying, if you link the climate change issue, so that that's something new that's popped up in different areas at different times.
Absolutely.
So if you're working at that level, you immediately can identify in this area there is a climate issue, drought or flood or whatever, which doesn't apply to other area. But however, how do we manage that?
Absolutely. I think, the point, that's why I said that,
Yeah.
A community-based monitoring system, once it is established, it is a generic system. It is a system that can be used for whatever the purpose that you want.
Yes.
Because you see, you have a system already established, and all the households are covered. And if a particular household is affected, that gets immediately reflected in the database, right? And then if that happens everywhere, in all the GN divisions and in all the DS divisions, and they get reflected, in real time. If you change something here, it just reflects,
That's right.
So
That's
I
right.
think this really opens up a whole new, possibility for us to, address the issues that we face. And of course, some are chronic problems, some are not so, like, periodic problems that we have.
Yes.
And so on.
Oh, good. So you got to given us a good view about vulnerability issues and how to resolve some of them. I hope our policy makers are taking all that into account. And I don't know what, but do you like to comment a bit more on, we didn't really touch on at system level, whether the politicians should be making changes, should they be even talking about this kind of thing, or are they?
No, actually this has been already, this analysis that I talked to you about, it has been already shared with the powers that be, and they are already aware of
it. Yeah, okay.
And we hope that they will
address some of
these issues, and then basically mobilize the institutions to take these things on board. And the institutions are all there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have all the institutions in that you need in the country, and we also have people who are there to be made use of for this purpose, and they can be retrained if necessary, and they can be given the necessary incentives, and they can be mobilized, and this can be done. And it is not something that you bring from somewhere else. It is already there. It is. I'm here talking about the resources that we have at our disposal. So it's not a matter of bringing resources from outside to establish this. But then, of course, we are living in an interconnected world. Obviously, we'll have to learn from each other. We have to mobilize resources wherever that is necessary to do various things and so on and so forth. But the basic thing can be done, and it's within our capacity.
Oh, well, I wish that people in power or authority listen to that and do something about it. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for that coverage. It's very good.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you. We are welcome.